Hey, welcome back, podcast friends. And in today's episode, this is going to be like a history lesson. And this is something that I was very interested in, mainly after I'd read a book. And this is a book, or if any of you are watching this on YouTube, it's called Eat Like a Human by Dr. Bill Schindler. And this was a very fascinating book. Dr. Bill Schindler is actually, over the last 4 years, my wife and I have become friends with him and his wife, Christina. And Bill Schindler is an extremely fascinating man. He is an internationally known archaeologist, primitive technologist, and chef, which basically means he has studied through archaeological findings. He has studied how we have grown throughout the centuries and how we have gotten bigger, and our brains have gotten bigger, and our bodies have gotten bigger, but our teeth and our GI tracts have gotten much smaller over the years and or over the centuries. And so he wrote this whole book that explains a lot of what's going on. And he's an adjunct professor of archaeology at the University College in Dublin. And we actually interviewed Bill and Christina on our podcast. If you want to look at episode 55, this is where we interviewed them. But basically, what I'm going to be telling you or showing you is just like I said, through the centuries, what I learned is just that we started off very, very small. And as we got bigger, our teeth and our GI tracts got smaller. And you'll see why this is very, very significant. But basically, his whole book started off with the fact that today, we can eat to obesity and we're still malnourished, or now we're more malnourished than we've ever been. Even though we're bigger, we don't have the nutrients on board that we need to. And I've said this before, human beings are the only animal that has to be told what to eat. No other animal does that. They are equipped to get the type of food that we need and they need, and their GI tracts are equipped to be able to eat that food and get the nutrients out that they need. Ours is not. We have to do different things to our foods in order for us to be able to eat what we want. So that's why we're the only ones who have to hire nutritionists and talk to our doctors about what they think is the most important food for us to eat, which we've already talked about that. Doctors don't get any of this information in school, so they don't really understand this. This is not their fault. I didn't understand this for the last 35 years either until I started finding out about it. But and we're the only ones that waste a ton of energy eating food that has zero nutritional value. We aren't getting any nutrients out of it, and we aren't getting anything that helps our digestive tract. In fact, it's making all those things worse. So, and the reason why this is first, humans, we are the weakest species on earth. If you just look at how we are built, and just some examples that Bill threw in, put in his book that I thought was really cool. As an example, the California mite. Okay, there's a Californian mite that can move 322 times its body length per second. That's how fast. If you want to equate that to Usain Bolt, he would have to run 1,300 miles an hour to be equivalent to what this Californian mite can do. As far as the dung beetle, a dung beetle can pull 1,141 times its own body weight. So, in comparison, that'd be like Arnold Schwarzenegger. He would have to pull 6 double-decker buses full of people to be able to equal what the dung beetle can do. And the sailfish can go up to 68 miles an hour. So, again, put in perspective, that'd be like Michael Phelps that he would have to cover 2,800 meters in the exact same amount of time that it usually takes him to swim 200 meters. So we are not efficient in our body as far as being able to be stronger, faster, all these things. We can't run, we can't fly, we can't dig. And these are all really important things because this is the type of stuff that we need to do, be able to get the nutrients. And we're talking centuries ago, we're talking millions of years ago. And so we've had to learn how to take care of this kind of stuff. Our GI tracts, our GI tracts are not made to eat a lot of the food that we eat. That's why we have to prepare it before we eat it. And that way we can get a lot more of the nutrients out of it. An example would be like cows. Okay. Cows eat grass. But in order for cows to eat grass and get the nutrients out of them, They do have a stomach, but their stomach has 4 different chambers. Okay, it's not like our stomach. So what a cow has, the 4 chambers, they have the rumen, they have the reticulum, they have the omasum, and the abomasum. Those are the 4 different chambers. So what these do is the cow is going to first, it's going to eat the grass. It's going to be eating the grass, and it's going to be chewing that with its teeth and chewing it, grinding that up as small as it can. They've got huge molars, so they can sit there and they can eat all this vegetation and break it all up. Then they swallow that, and they swallow that into the rumen. The rumen is a little pouch in their stomach that allows fermentation to occur. And what fermentation is, that's when you allow the bacteria and the viruses that are in the air and in the area, they get on and they attach that food and they start eating and they start breaking down. They break down all the sugars and they break down all the starches and they break this all down. From that point, after it goes through the fermentation in the rumen, that goes down into the reticulum. And in the reticulum, this wad of food, it starts getting saliva added to it. And the saliva starts breaking it down. And don't get grossed out. This is just what it is. But what they do now, then they take that rumen or the food that's in the reticulum, and that's called a cud. And they belch back up that cud and it comes into their mouth and they chew it again. So that's where if you ever see a cow just on the side of the road and he just standing there and he's just standing there chewing, that's why it's called chewing your cud. They're just sitting there and they're chewing this. And this is like the middle phase of their process that it goes through their stomach. So once the cow chews this cud, so it's already been fermented, it already has the saliva, they chew it and then they swallow it again. And this goes down into their omasum. And when it goes in the omasum, what that does is that absorbs all the water and that absorbs all the nutrients out of the food. And then it goes into the abomasum. And this is the one that's kind of similar to our stomach. And this is when all the enzymes go in and break down the rest of the food before it goes into the intestines. So there's a lot of things that this cow has to do and be able to eat these plants and then turn that into nutrients for us. Ducks and geese and all these other birds, when they eat grains, seeds and grains, they have a GI tract that is made to digest seeds and grains. We don't. Then what they have, they have what's called a crop. That's the first thing. So when they eat these seeds and grains, they have this crop, which is like a bulging out of their esophagus, their feeding tube. And this is just a little storage place that, again, the seeds and the grains can go into this storage place, this crop, and it sits there and it allows fermentation. It allows, again, the bacteria and the viruses that are in the air all around us, everywhere. We have bacteria around us all the time. That allows that to work on the food and starts breaking that down. And so it's something they can eat. Then after it breaks it all down, then it sends it down to the gizzard. And the gizzard has these 2 really muscular discs that goes and it grinds these seeds and these grains down to little bitty so it can actually be able to be absorbed and the bird can actually get the nutrients that it needs out of. Again, we don't have this. The animals that eat certain foods, their GI tracts are made for the types of food that they have. The only thing that our GI tracts really are made for is like when we're infants and we can absorb good, healthy mother's breast milk, not this infant formula that food manufacturers make, but good, healthy breast milk. Our GI tracts are made to get all the nutrients out of that. That's why that is a superfood is breast milk. And then we also, our adult GI tracts are kind of made more for like eating insects and some wild fruits and some wild vegetables. And that's really about all that it is. However, we developed over time, over the millions of years that we've been around, we've developed technologies that allow us to get the food and prepare the food outside the body before we ever eat it. And that's how we get our nutrients. Now, whether this was just by chance, serendipity, whether it's because we were imitating the other animals around us, or we just became innovative in being able to make our tools and everything, we don't know. But I think it's probably a combination of all that. And that's been able to allow us to be able to get the kind of food that we need. And we can do it where we can make them where they're safe, where we get a lot of the nutrients out of them. And the nutrients are very bioavailable. And we do this all before we eat them. So basically the timeline, and I'll just kind of go through this real quick, but the timeline, according to what I've read in Bill's book, again, it's called Eat Like a Human. In Bill's book, about 5 to 7 million years ago, our human beings, all we were hunter-gatherers. I mean, all we were gatherers. That's all we could do. So we gathered fruits and vegetables and insects, and that's really about what our GI tracts were needed for at that time. But at that time, we had very, very tiny bodies and we had very, very tiny brains. Then about 3.9 to 2.9 million years ago, something else started happening. We found, and this was actually done by bones that they discovered back in 1974. They discovered these bones and they called the bones Lucy. You can Google it if you want. But it's called Lucy, and Lucy was from 3.2 million years ago. Lucy was only about 3.5 foot tall and weighed about 70 pounds and had very, very tiny brains. Okay. Then 2.4 million years ago, this is when we turned into the Homo habilis. And Homo habilis, what they found with them is that they had huge, huge molars, like a cow. These molars were like 3 times what our molars are today, our teeth that we need to chew. Remember, they needed these huge molars because they were eating all these fruits and vegetables and insects. So now they had that, and 300,000 years ago, that's when we became Homo sapiens. And this is when we got a little bit taller. We got to be about 5 foot tall and around 130 pounds. But our brains grew about 350%. So this is very important. So what we've said, okay, and they've also noticed that the GI tracts, and they can tell by the rib cage. If the rib cage comes out and at the bottom it expands out, that means that we were making room for a lot of intestines. But as time went on, our rib cage started getting more and more narrow, which means our GI tract started getting smaller. So what this means is as time was going on, all of a sudden our brains were getting bigger, our bodies were getting bigger. So the two things that use the most energy, our brains and our bodies for growth, two things that use more energy than anything was occurring. However, our teeth were getting smaller and our GI tracts were getting smaller. So that's what makes this very curious. It's like, why is it that the things that take more energy is happening, but the things that we have to do to get that energy is getting smaller? So the only thing this could be is we must have been changing the type of nutrients that we were eating. And that's exactly what they found out. Because in the beginning, we were scavengers. That's all we did. We could, like we said, we scavenged, fruits and vegetables and insects. We were very, very tiny. So what we would do is we would hide behind trees or whatever, that's just painting a picture. We would hide behind trees and we would let the predators come and make the kill. So something like a saber-toothed lion would come in, they would make the kill. And what animals do when they kill, when predators kill prey, they eat the organs, they eat the blood, and they eat the fat. That's what animals want because of those by far are the most nutrient dense. So these animals that come in, they eat this animal with the blood, the fat, and the organs, and then they leave. Well, once they leave, that's when all these other little scavengers come in, like us. We would come in and we would eat as much of this animal that was left as we could before other animals started coming in, other scavenger animals come in and they start trying to get us and we'd have to leave. Or even if the original animal decided to come back and get a little bit more of the meal that he just had. But that's all we could do because our fingernails were small, our teeth were small, everything was small. We weren't very strong. We couldn't rip the limbs off these animals or anything. So we just had to eat what we could. And so that's why we were very tiny. However, as time went on, we started to learn different things. A big thing that they learned was how to make tools. So somewhere along the way, they realized that if they could cut a rock, if they could smash 2 rocks together, they could get these little sharp edges. So now, where other animals had teeth and claws, we had a tool, we had a rock. So what this means is now, when that same saber-toothed lion comes and eats that and then leaves, now we have tools that we can go in there, we can cut off limbs, we can cut off huge chunks of meat, and we can start taking those back to our group and help feeding the other people around us. So all of a sudden, they were getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and their brains were getting bigger. We were getting a lot more nutrients than we were able to do in the first place. So this kept going on, and again, because we are the weakest link, this went on for about for the last 3.5 million years, we've been able to eat meat. And that has changed a lot of things. It's not necessarily the fact that now we can eat meat, but it's the fact that we can also eat all the nutritious organs, blood, and fat. So we can eat the entire animal. It's called nose to tail. And that's when we start seeing a huge difference. So this is when we started having all these technological advances, where now, since we could hunt, we could fish, we could trap, because we were so slow, we were small and we were slow. Now we can use things like spears and slings and atlatls and bows, and we can use things so we can hunt from a distance, so we don't have to worry about these predators killing us, getting us. Then, because our teeth were so small, we can use the stone tools, and we can chop our food up a lot smaller before we ever even put it in our mouths. So that started increasing. Then we could start getting more quantity. So we could learn how to make nets and traps and weirs and poisons that we could do to get these animals. So we don't even have to be there. We can have these, or we can eat these large quantities of fish. And again, to bring back not only for us, but we can start feeding our group also, so our group can get bigger, and we can start helping each other. And then we also found ways of we can actually get food with us not even being there. Okay, we're not even there, so we could do like deadfalls and snares and pit traps. So we could trap the animals and then go back at our leisure, and we could get them at that time. So the biggest thing that we were able to do, how we have the advantage over all these other animals, is because we have a brain. We learn how to adapt. We learn how to do things. That's how we can shield ourselves from the cold. That's how we can feed ourselves. And this started changing everything. And then there came fire. Fire was huge. First, we had to learn how to not be afraid of it, because all the other animals are extremely afraid of fire. First, we had to learn not to be afraid of it, and then we started using it to our advantages. We used them to our advantages to make food and for protection and warmth and light. So now we started learning how to cook our food. And this is huge, because when you cook food, when you do it the right way, you break down the proteins and you break down all these starches into the little groups, so you can eat those more. So you can already break it down before we ever start eating them. So we don't have to have this huge GI tract to take care of all this, like we used to have back in the beginning. We had these huge GI tracts, and now we have these smaller ones. And that's why, because we can take care of this stuff on the outside. Then we also started learning very important things like fermentation. Fermentation, just like I talked about earlier, fermentation just means that you take the bacteria and the fungus and everything that's already in the air, and that starts working on your food, and it breaks down all these large starches, and it starts breaking it down into all the nutrients. It actually makes the nutrients come out of the food. So some examples of fermentation are like when you ferment vegetables, that's how you get sauerkraut. If you ferment dairy, that's how you get cheese and yogurt and butter. When you ferment grains, that's how you get sourdough bread, and that's how you get beer. Okay, so there's all kinds of fermentation things that we do. And just so you know, sourdough bread is a very, very good. It's good for you. It's healthy for you. Everything is fine. Just be careful if you are trying to figure out whether sourdough bread is good or not. And basically, as you already know, what man makes and puts out there and says that sourdough bread, that's not sourdough bread, even though it says it. The way you can tell is look at the active ingredients. If it says yeast in the active ingredient, then that is not sourdough bread. That is not that. They're skipping a very major step of fermentation. Instead of letting the bacteria and the funguses that are in the air actually work on the food like you're supposed to, they just bypass that step and they add yeast to it. So that makes it where it's not good, it's not healthy anymore. So fermentation is extremely important. But the big thing was, now that we had access to it and we knew how to prepare it, that means that we became more connected with our food. We spent almost all our waking hours gathering food. We'd either catch it, trap it, kill it, whatever we were learning to do at the time. That's what took up most of our time. But then all of a sudden, now came the agricultural revolution. And this was a long time ago. I mean, the true agricultural revolution came about 15,000 years ago. But this is when we went from being consumers to producers. Now we could produce, we could grow fields of crops. We could have herds of cattle, herds of pigs. We could make, this agriculture thing to where now we can be providing food for everybody else. And this was good until it continued to go on. And now all of a sudden you have certain groups that they decided they were going to make the food for everybody. And now we've just become the consumers. And the more that you become a consumer and you get away from where the food actually came from, and you let the food manufacturers tell us what we should eat, this is when our knowledge of nutrition goes down. And this is when everything started happening, because everything started going in the opposite direction of our ancestors. As we were getting bigger and bigger, and our brains were getting bigger, and our teeth were getting smaller, and our GI tracts were getting smaller, we were advancing. We were becoming bigger. Our stature became bigger. I mean, look how big we are now. But that doesn't mean you're nourished. It's just because you're big. And chances are, if you are very obese, chances are you are malnourished. So what we've done is now we've let food manufacturers guide where we're going to be. And what's happened with that is now we have become, instead of the nutrients given us our bodies to make us stronger and bigger, what's made us sicker. We are getting sicker and sicker. We're becoming malnourished. We have very poor diets, and we have misinformation about food everywhere. And this is where we find ourselves today, where we are extremely sick all the time, putting on all these medications, getting all these diseases. And it's because we've lost contact with our food. And now, since we don't know what nutrition really is, we're trusting the food manufacturers to give us their stuff, which has no nutrients in it at all. And this is a major problem with this. So, because the other thing is with food, these big food manufacturers, they have no responsibility to put nutrients in it. There's nothing that says that they have to make us healthy, that our health is in their welfare. That was never stated. That's never been said. They never said that they're going to make us healthy with our food. And in fact, they don't. They make it the opposite. It's extremely sickening what we are doing now, because we don't understand food and we don't understand nutrition. So that's why there's this massive movement right now to try to get people to understand what actually nourishes your body versus just putting something in your stomach because you're hungry. And this is important. Remember, and I've said this so many times, the nutrients that our body needs, okay? It needs amino acids. Amino acids are the basic building blocks of protein, and we use lots and lots of proteins. Okay, thousands of proteins are made in our body, so we need those amino acids to do that, to keep us functioning. We also need, there's 2 essential fatty acids, okay, omega-3 and omega-6. We've got to have fat. We use fat for so many good things in our body. Every single cell, our brains. I mean, we use fat for everything, our cushion, our protection, thermoregulation, everything. So we have to have fat, we have to have vitamins, and we have to have minerals, and then we have water. Those are the things we need. So we need protein, we need fat, vitamins, minerals, and water. And you can get all that from eating animals, because without a doubt, animal meat is way more nutrient dense than plants are. And I'm not saying that plants are bad. I'm not saying don't eat plants. I mean, we've been, that's how we started off, but that's not where you're going to get your nutrients. And you have to be very careful, because plants actually want to kill you. All plants have phytotoxins in them. They have toxins in them to keep animals from hurting them. And that's what my next podcast is going to be on. It's explaining all the different toxins that different types of plants have that are fine if you eat them just in little bits, but when you eat them all the time, they accumulate. And again, that'll be in my next podcast. But what we've done with these food companies, we've started making these cheap shortcuts. And we're shortcutting how we prepare the food. We're shortcutting what we put in the food. And now it makes it to where there's no nutrients. It's not really that bioavailable. A lot of the stuff just passes right through us, and it's not safe. And that's why everybody is so sick today. And so that's kind of what I wanted to make sure. So just to kind of wrap up what I said is, throughout the millions of years that we've been here, okay, whatever you want to think about that, the millions of years that we've been here, we started off very tiny bodies, very tiny brains, large molars, large teeth, and large GI tracts, so we could get as much nutrients out of these plants that we could. As we started growing, our teeth got smaller, our GI tracts got smaller, but our bodies and our brains got bigger and bigger. And that means that's because we were able to get a lot more nutrients in a smaller, compact area. That's why it's called nutrient dense. You get all the nutrients you need in just a little bit of food. And then we learned how to use weapons, and learned how to use all these other things to gather the food. And then we could get it in crops and get it in herds so we could feed other people. That's where we've gone. And now we've turned around and we're going back the other way. So we've got to learn how to get the food that we want and how to prepare the food the proper way so we get the most nutrients out of it. And that's what I'm hoping people are going to learn. So anyway, that's all I'm going to have for today. And again, for the next podcast, I'll be talking about the different plants we have and the toxins that are in them and why you have to be careful and don't just think, oh, it's a plant, I can eat it. That's not the case. And you definitely don't want to be eating them all the way or all season long. But I'll talk about that all later. So again, if you're interested in Dr. Bill Schindler's book, it's called Eat Like a Human by Dr. Bill Schindler. And I guarantee it's very, very exciting. He even has a whole chapter on just insects and the good nutrient value that you can get out of insects. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But that's all I'll do for now. I know I'm rambling, but please come back. Join me on the next podcast so you can learn about all the different types of toxins that are in every single plant, all plants, and why you have to be careful and just don't go eat anything anytime you want to when it comes to plants. So that's all I have for today. I hope you enjoyed it. And as always, thank you so much for listening. And please make simple, healthy choices to live a quality life.